Okay, hello everyone and welcome back to video number 2 of the Java Video Tutorials.net website. Today's video will be about two things. The first thing I want to talk about are objects, okay? And the second thing I want to talk about is a very important aspect in programming, and that is variables. Okay, so objects are kind of the fundamental aspect of Java. Okay, in Java, everything in Java is an object. Okay, and when I say object, what exactly do I mean? Well, an object you can think of as being a noun. Okay, and a noun is essentially like a person. It could be a place, or even as generic as just being a thing. Okay, so an example of a person, place, or thing, or an object in general is something like a chair, or a common example in programming examples is a vehicle, because a vehicle could be something like a car, it could be a bus. A vehicle can represent a great many things, and that's kind of important for something called inheritance, which I won't talk about now, but that's another aspect of Java, and Java being an object-oriented language. Okay, object-oriented is abbreviated with this shorthand, just OO. Let's see, another good example of a noun is actually user. Okay. So this is a great example because this is something that we're going to be elaborating on in this video tutorial series, are users. And especially because most websites have users where you can actually log in, just like you had to do with this website. You created a user account and you have a password and everything, and you have to log into the website. So those are all basic examples of what an object is in Java. Okay, so the next topic that I want to cover are variables. Okay, so I want to talk about what a variable is in general, and as well as how they are used in Java. Okay, so first let me explain real quick what I suppose the definition of a variable is. A variable is essentially it's just a storage location, okay, that's given an actual symbolic name. Okay, so some way to reference the variable, and at this storage location, it actually stores some sort of a value. Okay. So there's essentially the three aspects to a variable: the actual location of where it is, what you want to actually call it or what it's called, and the value that the actual variable will be holding onto or referencing. Okay, so let me try and give you a sort of a visual example of what I mean when I'm talking about all this stuff. So let's pretend we have a section of our computer memory, okay, on the screen. I apologize for my messy handwriting. And it is broken down into certain sections, okay? So I think basically what this represents is the actual random access memory on your computer. Now, if you're not familiar with what random access memory is, I wouldn't really worry about it at this point. All you need to know is that this memory is some sort of a storage location, like I mentioned before, okay? So, and we want to potentially store a variable into our memory location. So now we need to give it some sort of a name. So how about we choose the example of a user, or more specifically, a user has a username, and a user has, let's say, a password. What else would a user have? maybe an age, so I can get a number in here. So that kind of thing. So if and this is a user. So the username could be actually physically stored in a location within the memory itself. So let's say a username is, tpage, and the password could be stored as well, and that could be, I don't know, pwd if you want to be nice and not secure. Age could be stored in another location as well, so these are all the actual values that I mentioned before. Okay, the values. These represent the actual name of the variable, and what they're pointing to, okay, here, here, and here, is the actual storage location. Okay, which is the storage location in memory. So that's the three basic things that you need to have, or at least be familiar with, to understand what a variable is. And the whole bigger picture here is that a variable, the value that this variable name references can change. Okay, that's hence the word variable. So it could, you could change this at any point to, instead of, being tpage, it could be, jdoe or something like that. This can change depending on how you want your program to behave. All right. So what I want to do now that I've explained this is talk about the fact that variables can have different types. And this is a very important subject when you are referencing variables in general in any programming language. Variables can absolutely have different types. So what do I mean by that? Okay, so variable types can be... I'm going to start simple here, and as the tutorial videos go on and I show you actual coding examples and whatnot, you'll have a lot better idea of what it is that I mean when I say variable type and all the different kinds of types. But let me just introduce you to some of the more popular ones that are used inside of Java. Okay, so now I'm focusing more specifically on Java itself. So the first, and probably I would venture to say most common variable type in Java is the string. Okay, so what is a string? Well, you already saw me put it in before. I put these little quotes, and I had a username was tpage. Okay, so a string is essentially any assortment of characters that you want to put between quotes. Okay, and it could be any character. I mean, it doesn't have to be just letters. It could be a number, set of numbers followed by letters, and both uppercase and lowercase. It can have symbols. It can have whatever you want it to have inside of the quotes. Okay, so a string variable type is very useful for any sort of human language. Okay, so exactly useful for things like storing a username, because a username can be represented with a series of numbers and characters and special characters. Same as with password. Okay, a password also can contain letters and numbers and special characters and all that stuff. So that is essentially what you would use. You would use the string variable type if you wanted to create a variable like username and password. Well, you also saw me type in age, and age was special because it was just a number. Okay, so how would we represent something that we want to store as just a number? Well, there's this thing called an integer. Okay, and an integer, if you have been in any math classes before, an integer represents a whole number. Okay, a whole number. So what is a whole number? Well, 2 or 5 or 5,000 or negative 70. It's whatever you want to store that is a whole number inside of an integer variable type. Okay, so what if you want to store decimal points, decimal places? Well, you could use something called a double. And don't ask me why it's named a double, but that's just how they named it in Java, as well as most other object-oriented languages that I've worked with. Okay, so this allows you to store numbers with decimal points in them, and I don't know offhand how accurate it gets down to. You could easily look it up in a Google search. I don't know if it's like 16 decimal places or 8 decimal places of accuracy, but it's somewhere in that range. You can also store negative numbers inside of a decimal as well, inside of a double. So that gives you sort of a quick rundown of the basic types of variables that you will see in the Java programming language. So then the next question you might have is, well, why do we need to decipher between a string and an integer and a double? Because if you can store numbers inside of a string, then why wouldn't you just store these numbers inside of a variable as a string type instead of using it as an integer type? Well, it's a great question, and I can answer that for you with a simple equation. So if you were to use a string as a variable type, and you were to put the equation 2 minus 2 into the string and wanted to store that into the value of the string, what would you get? Well, if this was a string, okay, what you would get, the result, will be 2 minus 2. Okay, it's the string representation of what you just wrote in. Okay, so that's not exactly very helpful because we didn't expect to just see 2 minus 2, and that's because we didn't use the integer type. Okay, so if we were to use the integer type and put 2 minus 2, integers are treated inside of Java as integers, as numbers. So when you do the formula 2 minus 2 with an integer, you get the expected 0 result. Okay? And similarly, if you had a double and you had 1.2 minus 1.0, then the result will be 0.2. Okay? See how that kind of works itself out with the variable type that you're using? Okay? It's very important to give your variables the correct type. Otherwise, you might get some strange behavior based on whatever expected outcome you wanted to have. You might get such strange behavior if you assign the wrong type to your variable. Okay, but I'll have lots of examples on lots of different situations that require the use of different variable types. Okay, it's a very common thing inside of the Java programming language. All right, so how about we jump over to the Springsource tool suite, and I'll actually show you a sample program where I deal with these actual variables. So I guess go ahead and fire up your Springsource tool suite, and what you'll have to do is you have an empty sort of workspace here with no projects defined inside. So we'll have to create a new project. Okay, so let's do a new Java project. Wait for that to fire up, and we'll have to give it a name. So I'll just name it after the video that I'm currently shooting. And let's see, so we want to have runtime environment set up, correct. I think that all looks pretty good. So, good, so we'll say finish. Now it's telling me that it's trying to switch the perspective of my screen, of my whole view here, and it's trying to switch it to the Java perspective. So perspectives are over here. I'm currently in the Spring perspective, and I kind of prefer it that way. So I'm going to say no to having it switch on me. I don't make use of the task list or the Spring Explorer. So this is kind of how I have my my layout set up here. It's just personal choice, of course. So you see that it's created a new Java project. Okay, it has some resources that are assigned to it by default, and it creates a little source directory here. So that's great. So what I want to do is create a little program that what will come of the program is it'll output something down here into the console. Okay, real simple kind of program that we can use to get off the ground. So I have an empty source folder. So I'm going to right click and I'm going to say new, and I'm going to create a new Java class. Okay. So the class file is sort of the backbone of Java in general. It is essentially an object. Okay, so like I mentioned before, everything's an object, and when you create a class, that class will be an object. Okay, so more specifically, a class is like a blueprint for an object, but I'll get into that topic a little bit later. So for now, I just want to show you some examples of variables. So let's just call this one, variables example. And it's telling me that the use of the default package is discouraged. So I will give it a package name, and I'll just call it example. Actually, no, I'll call it net Java video tutorials example to follow not methodologies, but conventions. Okay, so I'll say finish, and it'll create a new file called variablesexample.java. So this is our class file. This represents an object. Okay. Normally, an object name would be something like chair or desk or user or what have you. So the name variables example is not exactly the best name for an object, but this is just my first little example here, and I don't want to make it too confusing. So I'm going to create a little piece of code here that again, I'm going to explain this stuff at a later point. This is a bit more of an advanced topic, so bear with me here while I type some code out. Okay, so I will be creating my program inside of this, between these two blocks of code, and I want to create a variable like I was talking about before. You saw me say string, and one of the strings I had created was username. Okay, so I say string a username, and I put a semicolon to end the line of code. So there we go. I've declared a variable, and I've given it essentially two of the three things that we need for a variable. Java will handle where it's stored. Okay, so the storage location will be handled automatically when you create or define the variable. So that's good. That's one. The second thing we need to do is give it a name. So I've named it username. So we have a type here and the actual name of the variable declared here, followed by a semicolon to end the line. So that's good. So the third thing that we're missing is the actual value that we want to store inside of the variable. So we can do that in two ways. We can say username equals, and then we put our double quotes like I showed before, and you can put tpage. So that's one way that you can actually assign a value to the variable. Okay. Another way to do it is you can actually assign it right where you declare it. So I could have even said username equals tpage up here. Okay, so both coding, I suppose, styles are completely valid, and again, it's a personal choice thing. It's however your program needs to function. Whatever makes the most sense, you can handle that and do that as you wish. So so there we go. Now I also want to quickly show what the value of the username is in my console. Okay, so I will do something called system out.println. Okay, and a semicolon to end the line. And here, the system.out.print line will actually print into the console, or output into the console, whatever you put inside of these two round brackets here, okay? So I'm going to actually take the username and put it inside of those round brackets. So now it will actually output the value of what's inside of the username into the console, okay? And it'll do that when we run our program. So how do we run the program? Well, we actually just right-click and say run as, and we say Java application. Okay, so here it'll launch it, and then there you go. So it outputs tpage, which is exactly what we assigned to the variable itself. Okay. So now here's something interesting. What if I change this to jdo? What do you think will happen? Well, how programming code works is it goes line by line by line, from top to bottom, and more or less from left to right. So what this will do is it'll say, okay, I'm going to declare a variable called username. I'm going to assign the value tpage to my variable. Okay. Then I'm going to go to the next line and say, oh, I'm going to take whatever was in username and replace it with this new value, jdo. And then I'm going to print out onto the console the value of what's inside of username. Okay, so it's not printing out username, it's printing out what's inside of the username. Okay, so let's try running this and see what we get. Run as Java application. So you see now the output is changed to jdo because we changed what username has inside of it. And this is the same thing as what I was showing before, where you had a value for the username of tpage inside of the memory location, and then I scratched it out and put jdo instead. So this is how you would do that in code. Okay, you assign it first, you change what's inside of username with a new value, and then you can output it to the screen. All right. So that's kind of a very basic rundown of how that will work, of how variable types work. So now let me do the other example I showed you. Okay, let me do 2 minus 2. Okay, and we'll still call it username just because I don't feel like changing the name of the variable, and we'll see if 2 minus 2 actually outputs 0 or not. So you see that it didn't do that. It outputted 2 minus 2 because we've declared it as a string. So what if we change this? What if we make it an integer? Okay, the first thing that's going to happen is it's going to complain. So you see it's underlined it in red, and if we hover over it, it says type mismatch, cannot convert from string to integer. So what that means is it's trying to take this value and assign it into username, which is now an integer. Okay, and it can't do that because these quotes here, these two double quotes, specify or signify that what's inside of them is a string. Okay, it's kind of a shorthanded way of knowing that what is inside here is actually supposed to be a string when it's wrapped inside of these double quotes. Okay, so let's change our variable name here. Let's not make it username. Let's change it to I don't know, math or something, and then put that as math. So that won't fix our problem, but that at least, you know, it makes a little bit more sense to have 2 minus 2 inside of math. So now what we want to do here is we don't want to have 2 minus 2 as a string. We want to make it an integer. So how do we do that? Well, we need to remove the actual quotes around it. So now I wonder what will happen. Let's run the program and find out. 0. So that is what we expected to have, right? Have happen. 2 minus 2 is indeed 0. So because we've converted this to an integer, Java now understands this as an actual formula, actual math formula that needs to be calculated. So it will actually look at 2 minus 2, it figures out the result of 2 minus 2, which will be 0, and then it assigns 0 into the math variable. Okay? And then we subsequently output that into the console. Okay? Now what's interesting is how you saw before how it complained when you had the quotes around it, like this. It complains and says type mismatch. because that's a string. Well, what if we add decimal places? What if we say 2.5 minus 2? It underlines it in red again, and now when you hover over it, it says typed mismatch cannot convert from double to integer. Okay? And this is what I was talking about before. When you have decimals, they need to be doubles. So if we change this to a double, now it's happy. So what would you expect the outcome to be for this? Well, it should be 0.5, right? So let's run the program and find out. And indeed, it is 0.5. So that's good stuff. Now, what's interesting here, what's sort of happening behind the scenes, which is a bit more of an advanced topic, but I'll talk about it right now, is that the number here is just 2. And when you write out just 2, that's actually, Java will actually interpret that as an integer, okay? Because remember, 2 is a whole number, and integers are whole numbers, or rather, whole numbers are integers. So what Java does is, it reads this in as an integer, and then it sees that you have a double declared over here, defined over here, because 2.5 is a double, and it will actually convert this behind the scenes into a double. So believe it or not, there's a difference in Java between 2.0 and 2. Okay? And the difference is that 2 is an integer, but 2.0 is a double. So that's kind of an interesting thing that Java does behind the scenes. So if we just run this again, we'll get the same output, and that's just because it does the conversion behind the scenes. So when Java can convert a number into what it needs to be, it will do so behind the scenes. Now that can cause some troubles in some occasions when you don't expect it to do that, and it does it anyway because it has to. That can cause some bugs, but we'll get into some examples later where that could cause problems. Okay, so there you go. That's a quick overview of what a variable is, and 3 of the different types of variables that you can have inside of Java. And I've shown you some code as well on how you can create a simple program to output it to your console. And perhaps in the next video I will talk about what this is, the public static void main, and why I have it in here. Okay? So I hope that was very informative for you, and I look forward to seeing you in the next video.